So what is it you do exactly?
Well, that in itself is quite a loaded question, sir. You see, everything on this table has some sort of purpose. I don't suppose you'd be able to hazard a guess as to what that purpose is.
I hate to think.
Go on, have a guess.
Operations of some kind.
Yes, I would have thought that my very distinctive dress would be enough to give it away, but you practically hit the nail on the head. Everything on this table is used for a medicinal purpose, specifically for the treatment of one kind of disease, which you may be aware of.
Black Death?
Black Death, yes, or the Great Plague, or the Great Pestilence, whatever name you want to give it to. All of which starts with this little fellow.
Leeches?
Well, no, this is actually the bacterium that
Ah!
the plague.
Right.
This is Yersinia pestis, the bacterium, as I say, that causes the plague. And this is roughly what they look like when viewed under a microscope, just without the adorable little eyes.
They'd be okay if they were that size, you could see them coming.
Oh yeah, they'd be fine if it was this size, but unfortunately they are tiny enough that we can't see them, and they number in their thousands, if not millions, when they're doing their thing. And it starts typically carried around, the general historical consensus is it starts out carried around on this fellow, the rat. So he's already got the plague. Oh dear me, how sick he is. And then, just to make things worse, along comes the flea, who then hops on, has himself a little snack, and unfortunately he picks up something else as well. Now the plague has a rather unfortunate effect on the flea, although to be fair it has a bit of an unfortunate effect on everyone, but for the flea what happens is that the plague multiplies inside of its feeding tract and actually blocks it, preventing the flea from feeding, and means that he ends up sticking back up anything that he tries to take down. So the end result of that is that, unfortunately the rat dies from plague, and suddenly the flea's got nothing to eat. What's he going to do? Oh, you look quite thirsty. Hops over to you instead, bites you, throws up in the bite, and then as he feeds, you also get the plague passed on to you as well. Unfortunate, but that's the end result of it. You also have to bear in mind it would also be passed from skin-to-skin contacts by people as well, but that's generally how we have theorized the plague was spread at the very least in its earliest outbreak. Now, unfortunately for these people, the discovery of him wouldn't come until about the mid-18th century, I believe. Alexander Yersin was the first man to discover this bacterium, so that's kind of was named for him, Yersinia pestis. Because I guess that's what happens when you discover a disease. But back in the day, you had to come up with your own theories on how disease was spread, and the main one is symbolized on this piece of paper here. I'm sure you recognize the names there on some description.
The elements.
The 4 elements of the earth, believed initially by the ancient Greeks, fire, air, water, and earth. And everything is supposed to be in balance until everything changes when the Fire Nation attacks. But what ends up happening here is that to maintain health, the elements, or the 4 humans as they are known, need to maintain balance. And if they fall out of balance, either by excess or a lack of, this is what causes sickness. A good example of that is what happens when you get a cold. What's one of the first symptoms that you get when you realise you've got a cold?
Runny nose.
Runny nose. In other words, an excess of phlegm, which is one of the humours, and the way you balance your humours is to simply blow your nose in that case. It's also where that myth comes from, where no doubt perhaps your mother or parents have ever said to you, oh, don't go outside when it's raining, you'll catch your death of cold.
Yes.
Utter nonsense. Cold is spread by a virus. It is not spread because you've got a little bit wet, but because when you get a cold, you suffer from an excess of wet and cold, i.e. too much phlegm. That idea still persists even to this day. I mean, being wet and cold probably doesn't help, but it's not the root cause of a sickness. Now, when it comes to balancing the humours, the main one that is used by most medical practitioners is bleeding. Blood is also one of the 4 humours, and blood could be drained in one of 2 ways, one of which would be done by this creature.
The leech.
Fortunately, leeches do not get this big, They typically grow to maybe about the size of my little finger there. And you'd simply get those slapped on your body, and they would drain off the excess or the bad blood. Now, unfortunately, that would only happen if you had leeches or could afford leeches. Otherwise, if you needed to be bled, you'd go and visit the barber instead.
Yeah.
Now, you must be thinking I misspoke there. A barber's job is to cut your hair.
His
not
pole.
cutting up in your veins. Well, back in the day, surgery was not something that was practiced by doctors. Medicine was a thinking man's game. It was something that you paid to go to university for. A learned man, a doctor, does not waste his time with labour such as surgery. That is left to the barber surgeons. So you could go and get your hair cut, but you could also go and see them about getting a limb lopped off if it's getting a little bit too green. This is also where the distinctive symbol of the barber comes from, which I'm sure you probably know what that is already.
Yeah, his pole.
The pole. The red and white striped pole outside a barber's establishment. What would happen is that obviously they would cut open a vein, drain you into a bowl. Once you've drained enough blood, obviously wrap a bandage around it. You start bleeding, take off the bandage, and you wrap it around the pole outside their establishment. Because not everyone can read and write, you need a way to show what your business is and how successful your business is. And that served twofold the purpose of the pole. The more bandages you have wrapped around it, the more successful a barber you appear to be.
I knew about the pole, but I didn't know about the bandages.
Well, yes, these days, of course, barbers shouldn't be doing that, and if you do come away from your barbers and you're bleeding, you should probably go and find another one. Now, the other prevalent medical theory, apart from the balancing of the humors, was also miasma theory. This was the belief that the disease takes the form of a foul smell, which is then spread through the air, and then when you intake it through whatever means, this is what causes your sickness. You can almost see the logic of that. Let's say you go to a city and you end up visiting one of its poorer parts of the city. Likelihood is most of the people there are going to be sick. It's also likely that that area is probably going to stink to high heaven. In fact, let's be honest, back in the day, a lot of the city probably stank to high heaven. So you think, oh, well maybe it's something in the air, maybe it's the stench. Which is also where you get the implementation of these marvellous masks. These were devised in the 17th century by one Charles de Lorme. He was a physician to the French court. And he devised what was essentially an armour against disease. The first thing is the mask. The beak is designed to hold a number of strong-smelling herbs and flowers. So what you've got here is a very early gas mask. It essentially almost works like a perfume or an air freshener. The way you ward off the bad smell, i.e. the miasma, is to have a nicer smell to counter it. Likewise, the rest of the outfit is designed to minimize physical contact where possible, because there was at the very least by then an understanding that we probably shouldn't be getting too close to the people who are sick. So they wear gloves, they also wear these robes. Typically these would be made from heavy leather and covered in a layer of animal fat, also known as sweat. And it works almost like a giant set of fly paper, so the miasma sticks to the sweat and doesn't stick to the skin. Doctors would also carry around a long cane, which would be used to examine their patients from a distance, as well as a method of self-defense if anyone gets a little bit too aggressive. Now, certain measures could also be used by others to ward off the miasma, such as what I have in this jar. I suppose you want to try and give that a bit of a whiff.
I recognise that smell.
Here's a hint, you wouldn't be giving this to children.
Yes, I just can't, I know what it is, I can't think of it.
Tobacco is the word you're looking for. So, tobacco would be used as a way to purify the air. Supposedly during the outbreak in London in the 1660s, it was one of the recommended public health measures was to take up smoking. Apparently even children were encouraged to smoke. Now for common folk, there would also be a slightly better smelling alternative to simply smoking. I'm going to take my glove off for this one. There.
Oh,
You may be able to recognise the petals of the flower this comes from.
no.
Typically a vibrant purple.
Lilac?
Lilac or also begins with an L. Lavender.
Lavender, of
Lavender
course.
is what this one comes from. But any kind of herb, so jasmine, thyme, juniper, even scented wood like ash, anything that produces a particular smell could be set around the home. You could put them in the fireplace to burn so you get a lovely perfume flame. You could also carry them around on a pouch on your belt, and this would also help to purify the air and keep away the plague. Apparently people who also worked with sewage would be just as well protected from the plague. Apparently the smell of sewage is not miasma, but it can ward away miasma, whatever kind of sense that means.
Wonderful.
But not just the air around you would need to be clear. Sometimes you would, of course, be recommended to take something. After all, this is medicine that we're talking about. Such as what we have in this jar. I'm not going to open this one because this one doesn't really have a smell. But I'll see if you can hazard a guess as to what this is.
It's like tar.
Sort of like tar, although you can eat this. It's quite sweet.
Treacle?
Yes, treacle.
Treacle.
Specifically, this is it was known in the ancient Greek world as theriac, which is a substance that's made from about 70 different ingredients, including crushed snakes, honey, and opium, among many, many others. Take that, you crush it all and mash it into a paste, and then leave that paste to age for about 10 years, and at the end result you have theriac, which is essentially a cure-all for any disease or poison.
Oh, right.
The only downside is that this would be pretty expensive. You need to have a lot of pennies to have yourself some theriac. So if you're a little bit more common, this would serve as something of an alternative.
No, rose petals?
It is made from roses, yes, certainly. Rose water.
Rose water.
These days, rose water can, at a pinch, be used as an antiseptic. Back in the day, obviously, you don't know what an antiseptic is, but people would wash their hands. It was recommended that people wash their hands with rose water or sprinkle it around their home. Vinegar was also used in a similar capacity. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit strange, if you didn't think that they were strange already. With some of the cures that we have here, such as what we have in this jar. Apologies if you can't quite make out the writing, but maybe if you take a look at the substance itself.
Salt? Silver iodide? Mercury? No.
Mercury, yes.
Mercury.
Hint, it's not actual mercury.
No.
Just for official purposes, this is silver paint. I got into trouble the last time I carried this stuff around.
I used to have mercury in a children's toy, a little maze.
Yeah, well, there you go. And obviously made in thermometers as well. Mercury was also, it was seen as sort of like something quite magical and special. I mean, you only need to look at mercury, like it's a beautiful silvery color, it's the way it flows, it's the way it exists as both a liquid and a solid. It was regarded as a vital ingredient in alchemy. It was also regarded as a curative property. Apparently you could wear this as an amulet and the pestilential particles would be drawn out of your body. You could also take it like you would take a medicine. And in one particular specific treatment, it was used for the treatment of syphilis. So the way that would work is that you would treat the affected area with mercury, and then the patient would be left in kind of almost like a personal steam bath to boil for a bit. And that was apparently meant to boil away the syphilis. And supposedly that was then extended to use against the plague as well. Whether, of course, the effectiveness is dubious at best.
Get rid of the patient as well.
Possibly. Now we also have what we did here in this jar. That is
emeralds?
Emeralds, yes. Ground into a powder, and then you would drink that with wine.
Oh.
Certain precious stones and precious metals were thought to have curative elements. Gold, for example, was thought to hold the curative properties of the sun and purge any impurities of the body. Emerald was believed to have quite similar properties. In actuality, if you drink this, you're probably going to get a very, very sore throat afterwards, among other things. Now, aside from medicine, religion played a major part in both the cause and the cures of the plague. It was thought that God had sent the plague as punishment for whatever personal or societal sin has been committed. And so praying was thought to be an effective way of getting rid of the plague, as well as ringing of church bells. Bells were thought to have a combination of different effects, including purifying the air, along with supposedly scaring away any evil spirits or demons that were supposed to bring the sickness. Then you have the measures that were taken by certain extremists.
Mm-hmm.
So you have an idea of this?
Self-flagellation.
Yes, indeed. This was a practice adopted in Germany by a group known as the Flagellants. They came about as a response to not only the plague, but also the perceived ineffectiveness of the church. The church was already having problems before the plague came along, with practices like nepotism and simoning running rampant. And when they started dropping like flies, or even just running away in the presence of the plague, well, your faith kind of gets questioned a lot in that kind of situation. The Flagellants were something of a response to that. They were actually surprisingly popular. Unlike the clergy, they spoke the language of the people, and they were actually seen to be doing something and not just praying and hoping it will go away. They would gather in hundreds and move in processions from town to town, where they would make visceral displays of themselves, striking themselves across the back whilst chanting prayers and calls for salvation, making a very, very big mess. Now, the few unfortunate things about the Flagellants, well, among many things. One is moving around in a large group from settlement to settlement during a time of plague is probably not the best idea. Second is that bandits would apparently tack themselves onto the end of flagellant processions and cause problems by sneaking into town. They would also attack the perceived outsider groups, specifically the Jewish communities. It was believed that the Jewish people were poisoning the water supplies. Anyone with common sense would recognize that the Jewish people were just as vulnerable to the plague as anyone else, but in times of plague, common sense goes flying out the window. So they would put Jewish communities through the whip and the flame. Eventually, the Pope at the time, who was either Urban or Innocent, I forget which one, declared the movement as heretical, and they were swiftly disbanded. Now, the last two cures I want to highlight for you are my two strangest ones, and we've already seen all this today, so these must be quite special. One of them is written on this piece of paper.
Magic.
Magic, and can you see what the word is?
Abracadabra.
Yes. Now, abracadabra these days is used as a wishy-washy thing by magicians, but it is an ancient word of power. One person has told me that apparently it is derived from Hebrew, and apparently translated into English, roughly it means, I speak as I create. I don't know if that's true or not. I need to look into it myself, but that's one of the things I've heard for it. But the way it's written out here, it's written out as a triangle, which is already a powerful symbol of power. Well, powerful symbol of power, yay. The Holy Trinity likewise takes up a similar spot. You'll also notice that the letters vanish one by one the further down the triangle you go. The idea is that as the word vanishes, so does the impure presence on the body. You would either wear that as an amulet, or you would cast it into a stream. And then as the ink dissolves away, so does the sickness. Very fancy and very eye-catching, but probably not very effective. Then, last but by no means least, we have this. Now, I'll leave this to you. How is a chicken meant to cure plague?
Blood.
No,
No?
you need the chicken alive for this.
Oh. Nope. No idea.
Right, well, one of the main symptoms of the Black Death, specifically the bubonic plague, is the presence of buboes, which gives it
Yes.
These are fist-sized swellings which appear around the armpit or around the groin. Now, what will happen with this is that, first of all, you need the chicken alive, as I said. So what you do is you take it, you shave its bottom, and then you stick up the patient's arm, slap it on the bubo, leave it there for a while, and apparently what this is supposed to do is it will draw out the plague from your body and pass it into the chickens instead. You might need a few hours, you might need a few chickens, but that was what was meant to happen. Now, this may seem utterly ridiculous, completely nonsensical, but if we look back on our own recent plague, where we have such things as people attacking and burning 5G towers, world leaders recommending us to drink bleach, or eating fruit that looks like the virus before we got the vaccine, and indeed the behaviour of certain people in regards to vaccines, you can see that maybe there's
nothing's changed.
Not as silly or as daft as you might let the other legislators think. It's purely desperation and fear in the face of something that the thing about disease is, like, we can't really deal with it very well. Disease is practically invisible and it can strike at any time. You can't, like, put up a wall against it. I mean, you can, but you can't really tell whether or not it's there. And, you know, humans are afraid of that. And most people don't like being faced with something they can't deal with directly, so they want to do something to deal with it directly. Most of this is literally just a case of throw it at the wall and hope to God it sticks, because we don't have any other answers at the minute. The plague itself had a number of different impacts, including stuff that we're still seeing today, such as the restructuring of labour forces, shall we say. More people realising that they don't have to do back-breaking labour for very little pay and are going to seek work elsewhere. Likewise, when the plague first came about, this eventually led to the Peasants' Rebellion, where the peasants rose up against their masters for the horrible conditions and pay they were getting. Unfortunately, they were crushed. But there's definite signs of that once again happening. Faith was questioned. It would eventually lead to things like the Reformation of the Catholic Church, as well as just a sort of general sort of restructuring of society in general. And it'd be quite interesting to see where it all ends up in the end.